Hello, Spio here, and today we will be using Tribute's emitter to generate new wavetables. The emitter can be accessed with this little upwards pointing arrow right here, and it's basically a workaround for the fact that rec extensions cannot output files directly, but they can output audio. So when I press the emit button, Tribute will generate a wavetable from its current settings and output it on its audio output. In order to make use of the emitted wavetable, we can hook up the control room out of the master section to the audio I/O sampling input. And let's make sure that there's nothing else connected to the sampling input. We only want the left channel. Since we are outputting wavetables, we can go for mono. And just like that, we can now resample anything that comes out of reason right back into it. So let's grab a second tribute as the target for our emission. Let's hit start sampling on the wavetable and hit emit on tribute 1. And we have created a new wavetable called sample1, which is just a constant sign. So it's completely static. There's no movement on the wavetable because in the patch that was used to generate the wavetable, there's also no movement. It's just a static sign. So let's add some movement. We can use envelope 1 as a ramp up and route it to the oscillator 1's inner. Before we emit this wavetable, let's quickly go over the period and count settings here in the emitter. So right now the period is at 1/8 and the tempo of the envelope is also at 1/8, and that means that the emitted wavetable will span the entire length of this envelope. If the period was at 1/16, for example, the emitted wavetable would only span up to the half point of the envelope. So the period gives us an option to control how much of the modulation that Tribute has from its envelopes and mods is actually considered for the outputted wavetable. And if these match, then the whole envelope will be considered. So for example, if you have a looping mod that has many different settings, sections like this, and we can choose with the period how far into this mod we want to go for our outputted wavetable, which is useful if you have a Tribute patch that was not originally designed to create wavetables, but you still want to see what kind of wavetables you can get from it. You can use the period to choose how much of the modulation you want to keep. So the count is simply the amount of subtables that'll be present in the emitted wavetable. And these subtables are evenly spaced within the period that you set. All right, let's take a listen to what this emitted wavetable will sound like. So no surprise, when the wave knob is all the way at 0, we have 0 modulation on the inner. When it's all the way up, we have all of the modulation on the inner. So we have baked this modulation from this envelope into a new wavetable called sample2. Let's try something else. So we'll reset this tribute and switch it to a sawtooth, then enable the filter as a radical low pass, and now let's emit this. So as you can see, we've generated kind of a squiggly sawtooth that sounds something like this. And you can see it's a sawtooth that has all of its higher harmonics cut off, because that's what we set up the filter to do. So one thing we should note about the filter is when we actually emit, the filter is applied to the generated wavetable in the frequency domain. So this is now spectral filtering, which is different from the usual behavior of the filter and Tribute. One of the side effects of this is that even though the cutoff of the filter is at like 600 Hertz right now, the emitted table that has used this filter can obviously have frequencies that are much higher if we play a high note. So the filter is really just used to manipulate the harmonic content of the emitted wavetable, which can then obviously be used in other settings with higher notes and higher frequencies. If you're interested, the base frequency at which the emitted wavetable will start checking the frequency response of the filter and apply it to its own harmonics is about 43 Hertz, which is F1. But you can check the manual for that kind of info. If you're just interested in coming up with cool tables, it's enough to know that you can set up a filter response here and it'll be kind of copied onto the harmonics of the wavetable that'll be emitted. So let's try a more fun setup, like 7 notches with a bunch of resonance and an envelope running its spread, like so. So now we have baked this filter modulation right into a wavetable called sample 4, which is loaded right here. And we could now save this wavetable or use it in another bass patch. And it's quite a powerful method because right now we have once again 2 filters freed up, and we could bake filter automation on filter modulation and so on until we have a completely crazy table if we wanted to do that. But let's do something else instead and try out one more thing. We can also use unison on the emitted tables. So let's just grab a saw with 8 voices and a mild amount of detune, and let's resample that as a wavetable. So we get this super saw table, which sounds kind of cool, but there's very little movement. So let's bring up the detune and check out what that sounds like. Alright, we have much more movement, maybe even too much. It's very busy now. One way to make a table less busy is to simply emit less subtables that tribute will then crossfade between. So we still have a range of different sounds, but that range will be less busy since there's less points that tribute will crossfade in between. So let's have only 5 subtables. And now we have this nice kind of hyper saw growl that is always a nice touch. Let's move on and actually use tribute 2 as the source and emit from this one. So the workflow that I had to create all of the wavetables in tribute's resource folder is actually one where I had a bunch of tributes and I would emit from one to the next and then from that one to the next one and so on. It's like a chain. And at each point, I would do some modulation, some filtering, and so on until I was finally at a wavetable that I was happy with. So let's chuck in a third tribute right now and apply some more modulation to tribute 2's hyper saw kind of wavetable right here. And I'll do that more or less at random. So I'll route envelope 1 to, let's say, oscillator 1's inner with some amount, and then I'll use an expressive frequency response on filter 1 like the deft one. And I'll use only some of it, so we still have some of the high harmonics coming through, and I'll run envelope 1 to its spread with a negative value. Why not? And then I'll also add some voices with a little detune on the unison, so the whole table will be a bit washed out. Then I'll emit about, let's say, 10 subtables of this, and what I'll also do is I'll run envelope 1 to the oscillator 1's wave, because otherwise all of the modulation would only affect the first subtable, but we want to keep all of the motion that we added when emitting from tribute 1. So right now, when we run envelope 1, which is just a ramp up over 1/8 to the wave, and we emit over 1/8, we'll have the whole range of the wavetable that is in here, also in here, but we'll have all of the modulation and filtering applied. So let's see what this sounds like. It's maybe a bit too washed out, so I would bring down the mix and the detune and try again. And that's a bit more sharp, a bit clearer. But obviously you can have a lot of fun and play around for a long time with these settings and wavetables until you arrive at a table you're happy with. But for the sake of this video, I'll just say I'm happy with sample 9 as a wavetable, and now I want to export it. So sample 9 right now is just a song sample within your project file, and you can browse to those using the browser. Here are the song samples, and under all self-contained samples you will find sample 9. You can hit edit sample on that by right-clicking on it, and now you see that the start crop marker is already placed at the first transient. Now you need to be careful that the first transient is not necessarily the first non-zero sample, so this automatic placing might swallow the first sample of your wavetable. If you want to make absolutely sure that your table is completely exported, you'll have to enable emit on C8 right here, then draw in a C8 node in the sequencer, bounce that to an audio file, and then bounce that to disk, and then you can be sure that your table starts at the exact place where the first sample is. But I'm lazy right now, and also with a table that is so busy, like this one, it doesn't do too much damage if we swallow the first sample of it. So I'll just take this starting crop position, I'll crop it at the end, I can also normalize it. Tribute normalizes all of its subtables when it loads a new wavetable, but other wavetable synthesizers might not. So that can be helping. That can be helpful. Then I can save this and then export to disk, and that'll be our new wavetable. So call it something useful. And now on my desktop we have our new wavetable exported, and I can load it into another tribute and see how that sounds. So this way we can create wavetables, export them and save them for later use, or even sharing them on the internet, and also for using them in other wavetable synths, since most wavetable synths also cut the wavetables into subtables of length 2048 subsamples. We can, for example, also use Europa with this subtable now. One pro tip is, if you're browsing a lot of tables in your browser, you might want to disable the autoplay, because these tables usually don't sound great when you play them back as samples. But now I have loaded this up in Europa with the setting on user wave. So one thing that might happen sometimes is Europa is a little confused, because it seems like we did cut off the first sample when we exported it with the automatic transient detection, and now there's a bunch of zeros at the end with some weird peak, which I'm not sure where that's coming from. But most of the content before is the same as the one in as we have it loaded in Tribute. Another target that you might want to create wavetables for is Serum. So if you have a Serum and you want to load up a wavetable that you've bounced in the way that I did with my wavetable from Tribute, you'll first have to get it into Serum's own format, and to do so you'll have to one time import the wavetable using the wavetable editor, and down here where it says enter formula, you'll have to type in 2048, which will split any wavetable that you pull on top of this display into subtables of 2048 samples, and then you'll have to drag in your wavetable from your Explorer, because for some reason this doesn't work. I'm not sure why. But if you have your Explorer open, you can just drag in this wavetable, and it's now loaded into Serum. And if you also add the morph tables, it'll sound exactly the same as it does in Tribute, or a little bit different, obviously, because Serum's oscillators are coded in a slightly different way, I assume. Would be very weird if they weren't, and there'll be some very, very mild differences, but the wavetable is exactly the same now. So this is a way you can create wavetables that are compatible with Europa Serum and pretty much any other wavetable synth that's come out in the last like 10 years, or maybe 5. If you don't want to go through the step of importing the table into the editor and setting the crossfade tables every time, you can also save this as a Serum table by using the save button up here. And actually saving this as a Serum table doesn't mess with the contents of the table itself, so you can still load this up in your Tribute and it sounds exactly the same. However, if you now place this wavetable in Serum's user folder right here, you can load it up from Tribute's wavetable browser up here directly, and you can use it like that in Serum. Alright, that's pretty much all I wanted to touch on in this video. I know I glossed over a bunch of the details, so if you have any further questions, let me know in the comments below or write a post in the subreddit, and I'll be sure to respond. Thank you so much for watching, have a good one of whatever you're having, and I'll see you next time.